the man who left everything behind. Imagine a world where every street corner is filled with idols, a world where people bow before statues made by human hands, a world where the movements of the stars are worshipped as divine powers, a world where traditions are accepted without question because they have been passed down for generations. This was the world into which Abraham was born. Long before he became known as the father of faith, before nations traced their origins back to his name, before billions of people across the world looked to him as a spiritual ancestor, Abraham was simply a man searching for truth. His story begins in the ancient city of Ur, one of the greatest centers of civilization in the ancient world. Located in Mesopotamia, in a region often called the cradle of civilization, Ur was a city of impressive architecture, thriving commerce, and sophisticated culture. Its people were skilled builders, merchants, astronomers, and craftsmen. By every worldly standard, it was a place of success and security. Yet beneath its achievements lay a spiritual problem. The people of Ur worshipped many gods. Some worshipped the moon. Others worshipped the sun. Others bowed before carved idols made from wood, stone, silver, or gold. Temples dominated the skyline, and religious rituals shaped everyday life. To question these beliefs was not merely unusual, it was dangerous. Everyone accepted the system. Everyone followed the traditions. Everyone believed the same stories. Everyone except Abraham. Even as a young man, Abraham began asking questions. Questions that many people avoid because they are uncomfortable. Questions that challenge assumptions. Questions that force a person to think beyond what everyone else believes. As he looked around at the idols worshipped by his people, something did not make sense. How could a statue carved by a human being become a god? How could something that cannot move, speak, hear, or think possess divine power? How could an object created by human hands become worthy of worship? These questions planted a seed in Abraham's heart, a seed that would eventually change the course of history. Tradition says that Abraham observed the world around him with remarkable curiosity. He looked at the stars shining across the night sky. Their beauty was breathtaking. Their movements seemed mysterious and powerful. Many people believed the stars controlled human destiny. For a moment, Abraham considered the possibility. Could these magnificent lights be divine? But as dawn approached, the stars disappeared. They faded from sight. And Abraham reasoned that something truly worthy of worship could not simply vanish. Then he looked at the moon. Large, bright, and majestic, it illuminated the darkness and appeared far more powerful than the stars. Could this be the true God? Yet as the night ended, the moon also disappeared. Again, Abraham concluded that what disappears cannot be the ultimate source of all existence. Then he turned his attention to the sun. Its power seemed unmatched. It warmed the earth. It illuminated the world. It sustained life. Many civilizations worship the sun as the highest deity. Yet as evening came, the sun also set below the horizon, and Abraham realized that even the greatest visible object in the sky was subject to limits. It came and it went. It rose and it fell. It could not be the eternal creator. This process of reflection led Abraham toward a profound conclusion. Beyond the stars, beyond the moon, beyond the sun, beyond every visible thing, there must exist one supreme creator, a creator who made the heavens and the earth, a creator who depends on nothing and no one, a creator who is eternal, invisible, and sovereign over all things. This realization placed Abraham on a path radically different from everyone around him. Most people simply inherited their beliefs. Abraham examined them. Most people followed tradition. Abraham pursued truth. Most people accepted what they had been taught. Abraham dared to question. Throughout history, this willingness to seek truth has often required courage. It is easier to conform. It is easier to agree with the crowd. It is easier to avoid difficult questions. But Abraham's life reminds us that genuine faith is not blind acceptance. It begins with a sincere search for what is true. As Abraham's conviction grew stronger, conflict became inevitable. The beliefs of his society were deeply rooted. Religious practices supported political authority. Economic systems depended upon temple worship. Entire communities were organized around the worship of many gods. When Abraham challenged these ideas, he was not merely expressing a personal opinion. He was confronting the foundations of his culture. According to ancient traditions, Abraham openly criticized idolatry. He pointed out the absurdity of worshiping objects that could neither help nor harm anyone. He challenged people to think critically about their beliefs. He invited them to consider the possibility that there was only one true God. Not everyone appreciated his message. Many resisted, many rejected him, many viewed his ideas as a threat. History repeatedly shows that those who challenge accepted beliefs often face opposition. Abraham was no exception, yet he remained steadfast. His commitment to truth became stronger than his desire for approval. His loyalty to God became greater than his fear of rejection. Then came the defining moment, the moment that transformed Abraham's life forever. God called him. The call was simple, yet it demanded everything. Leave your country, leave your people, leave your father's household, leave the place where you feel safe, leave the place where you are comfortable, leave the place where your identity has been established. Go to a land that I will show you. Notice what makes this command so remarkable. God did not immediately provide every detail. He did not hand Abraham a complete map. He did not explain every step of the journey. He simply asked Abraham to trust him. This is where Abraham's faith becomes extraordinary. Most people are willing to move when they know exactly where they are going. Most people are willing to act when every question has been answered. Most people are willing to follow when every risk has been removed. Abraham received none of those guarantees. He was asked to walk by faith before he could walk by sight. Imagine what this decision required. He would leave behind familiar streets. He would leave behind lifelong relationships. He would leave behind security, possessions, and certainty. He would enter an unknown future guided only by trust in God. For many people, the greatest obstacle to spiritual growth is not lack of knowledge. It is attachment to comfort. Comfort feels safe. Comfort feels predictable. Comfort feels secure. Yet growth often begins where comfort ends. Abraham understood this. At some point, he made a decision that changed history. He said yes. He chose faith over certainty. He chose obedience over comfort. He chose purpose over security. And with that decision, the journey began. The elderly man who would one day become the father of nations stepped into the unknown. Every step carried uncertainty. Every mile required trust. Every day demanded faith. Yet Abraham continued moving forward. This journey was not merely geographical. It was spiritual. God was not only changing Abraham's location, he was transforming Abraham's character. The road ahead would contain blessings. It would also contain trials. There would be victories. There would be disappointments. There would be promises fulfilled. There would be seasons of waiting. But before any of those events could occur, Abraham first had to learn one fundamental lesson. Faith means trusting God before you can see the outcome. This lesson remains relevant today. Many people are waiting for absolute certainty before taking the next step in life. They want every answer before making a decision. They want every risk removed before moving forward. They want complete visibility before beginning the journey. Yet Abraham's story teaches a different principle. Sometimes clarity comes after obedience. Sometimes understanding follows action. Sometimes the path becomes visible only when we take the first step. As Abraham left everything behind, he became a living example of courage. Not the courage that comes from confidence in oneself, but the courage that comes from confidence in God. His departure from Ur marked the beginning of one of the most influential journeys in human history. A journey that would shape nations. A journey that would influence civilizations. A journey that would inspire billions of believers across thousands of years. Yet at that moment, Abraham could not see any of that. He simply trusted. He simply obeyed. He simply followed. And sometimes that is exactly how great stories begin. Not with certainty, not with power, not with fame, but with one person willing to trust God enough to take the first step into the unknown. The journey had begun. Abraham had left behind the comfort of Ur. He had abandoned certainty for faith and security for obedience. Yet if he believed that following God would immediately lead to an easy life, reality quickly taught him otherwise. One of the greatest misconceptions about faith is the idea that obedience eliminates difficulty. Abraham's story proves the opposite. The moment he stepped onto the path God had chosen for him, a new series of challenges emerged. The land ahead was unfamiliar, the future remained uncertain, and the promises of God seemed impossibly large compared to Abraham's circumstances. God had promised that Abraham would become the father of a great nation. Yet there was a problem. Abraham had no child. Years passed. Then more years passed. Still no child. The promise remained. The evidence did not. This became one of the greatest tests of Abraham's life. How do you continue believing when nothing seems to be happening? How do you trust when every visible fact appears to contradict the promise? Many people can believe for a few days. Some can believe for a few months. Abraham was asked to believe for decades. As the years moved forward, Abraham grew older. Sarah grew older. The possibility of having children became increasingly unlikely. Human logic suggested the dream was over. Human reason suggested the promise had failed. Yet God continued reminding Abraham of what he had spoken. One night, Abraham was invited to look toward the heavens. The stars stretched endlessly across the sky. God told him that his descendants would one day be as numerous as those stars. At that moment, Abraham faced a choice: trust what he could see, or trust what God had said. Faith often lives in that tension, the tension between present reality and future promise, the tension between visible circumstances and invisible hope. Abraham chose hope, again and again, even when he did not understand, even when doubts tried to enter his heart, even when delays seemed unbearable. Along the way, Abraham also faced practical difficulties. There were famines, there were dangerous journeys, there were conflicts between groups traveling together. There were moments when survival itself appeared uncertain. Each challenge revealed something important. Faith is not merely believing in God's existence. Faith is trusting God's character. Abraham was learning that God could be trusted even when circumstances seemed confusing. He was learning patience. He was learning humility. He was learning dependence. Most importantly, he was learning that spiritual maturity is often developed through waiting. The waiting season is rarely enjoyable, yet it is often where the deepest growth occurs. Many people want the blessing. Few want the preparation. Many want the promise fulfilled. Few want the years of refinement that come before fulfillment. Abraham experienced both, and through every test, his faith became stronger. Not because life became easier, but because he learned that God remained faithful regardless of circumstances. The man who left Ur as a seeker was slowly becoming a prophet, shaped by experience, endurance, and trust. As the years passed, God's relationship with Abraham deepened. This was no longer merely a journey of obedience. It became a covenant, a sacred agreement between God and man. Throughout history, covenants have represented commitment, loyalty, and responsibility. But this covenant was unlike any other. God promised Abraham three extraordinary things: a land, a people, and a blessing that would eventually reach the entire world. These promises seemed impossible. Abraham was a wandering nomad. He possessed no kingdom, no army, no empire, no great dynasty. Yet God was speaking about nations, entire nations, generations yet unborn, a future beyond anything Abraham could imagine. Then came one of the most important moments in biblical history. God changed Abram's name to Abraham. The new name carried profound meaning. It reflected his future role as the father of many nations. At that moment, Abraham still had no son through Sarah, yet God was already speaking about his future as though it had been accomplished. This teaches a remarkable lesson. God often sees possibilities where human beings only see limitations. Human beings focus on current circumstances. God sees future outcomes. Human beings measure resources. God measures purpose. Human beings see obstacles. God sees opportunities. The story then introduces one of the most complex chapters in Abraham's life: the birth of Ishmael. Driven by impatience and human reasoning, Abraham and Sarah attempted to help fulfill God's promise through their own efforts. The result was conflict, pain, and consequences that would echo through generations. This part of Abraham's story is deeply human. Even great people of faith make mistakes. Even faithful people sometimes act out of fear. Even those who trust God can struggle with waiting. Yet God's plan continued. Years later, when Abraham and Sarah had reached an age when having children seemed impossible, the miracle finally occurred. Isaac was born, the child of promise, the child many believed would never come, the child whose birth demonstrated that God's timing is often different from human expectations. Laughter filled the household. Hope was renewed. The impossible had become reality. But the significance of Isaac extended far beyond one family. Through Isaac would come generations of descendants. Through those descendants would emerge the people of Israel. Through that history would eventually come prophets, kings, and spiritual leaders who would shape world civilization. At the same time, Ishmael would also become the ancestor of great peoples. Thus, Abraham became a central figure connecting vast portions of humanity. Judaism honors Abraham as the father of the covenant people. Christianity sees Abraham as a model of faith and trust in God. Islam reveres Abraham as one of the greatest prophets and a model of submission to the Creator. Across continents and centuries, billions of people look back to this single man. A man who once stood alone, questioning idols. A man who left everything behind because he believed God was calling him. The covenant had begun. The promise was unfolding. History itself was being transformed. By now, Abraham had experienced many tests. He had left his homeland. He had survived years of uncertainty. He had waited for promises that seemed impossible. He had witnessed miracles. Yet one final test remained, the greatest test of all, a test so profound that it continues to inspire reflection thousands of years later. God asked Abraham to offer his beloved son, the son he had waited for, the son through whom the promise was supposed to continue, the son he loved more than words could express. The request seemed impossible to understand. Why would God ask such a thing? Why test Abraham in this way? The journey toward the mountain became one of the most dramatic moments in religious history. Every step must have felt heavy. Every mile carried emotional weight. Yet Abraham continued forward, not because he understood everything, but because he trusted the one who had guided him throughout his life. Faith does not require understanding every detail. Faith requires confidence in God's character. When Abraham arrived at the appointed place, the tension reached its highest point. The years of waiting, the promises, the covenant, the future, everything appeared to rest upon this single moment. Then, at the very last second, God intervened. The sacrifice was stopped. Abraham's faith had been demonstrated. His trust had been proven. His obedience had been confirmed. The test was never about destruction. It was about surrender. God was revealing that Abraham's greatest treasure could not replace God himself. This moment became one of the most powerful symbols in the history of faith. A symbol of trust, a symbol of obedience, a symbol of complete devotion to God. After this event, Abraham's place in history was secured. His influence would extend far beyond his lifetime. Kings would trace their ancestry to him. Prophets would speak about him. Sacred scriptures would remember him. Entire civilizations would honor him. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Abraham's legacy is not what he built. It is what he believed. He never ruled a global empire. He never commanded vast armies. He never possessed the wealth of history's greatest kings. Yet his faith changed the world more profoundly than many conquerors ever could. His story teaches that greatness is not measured by power. It is measured by faithfulness, not by what a person owns, but by what a person trusts. Not by how loudly a person speaks, but by how faithfully a person follows God's call. As Abraham's life drew to a close, he could not yet see the full impact of his journey. He could not see the billions who would one day know his name. He could not see the religions, nations, and civilizations that would trace their spiritual roots back to him. He could not see the generations who would study his life as an example of faith. Yet the seeds had already been planted. What began in the streets of Ur with a young man questioning idols became one of the most influential stories in human history. Abraham's life teaches that faith often begins with questions. It grows through obedience. It is refined through trials. It is strengthened through waiting. And it reaches its highest expression through trust. His journey reminds us that God often calls ordinary people to extraordinary purposes. Not because they are perfect, not because they have all the answers, but because they are willing to listen, willing to trust, willing to follow. Thousands of years later, Abraham still stands as a symbol of courage, conviction, and faith. A man who left everything behind. A man who walked into the unknown. A man who trusted God when the future could not be seen. And because he did, his story continues to inspire the world. That is why Abraham is remembered not merely as a historical figure, not merely as a prophet, not merely as the ancestor of nations, but as the father of faith itself.